Okay, welcome back. This is the Virtual Residency Workshop 2023. It's Thursday, June 29th, and I want to introduce our next session. This is an intermediate panel, Facilitating for Non-Traditional Disciplines. Our moderator is Bob Freeman of Harvard. And Bob, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce the panel.
Great, thank you, Henry. Good afternoon, everybody. I think we are the last one of the day. So, all that stands between us and your dinner or popcorn or whatever it may be at the end of the day is this panel. But trust me, you'll want to hang on because I learned a lot and had a great time talking to the panelists. So we're here to talk about non-traditional disciplines. And this makes me think to the heydays of so many years ago, the long tail of research at that point in time was biology. So I'd love to, before I introduce the panelists, turn it to you, the attendees, and say, what do you consider the non-traditional disciplines in research? So feel free to unmute and voice, or feel free to drop in the chat. Organized chaos is fine for a few moments.
Yes, try to bet which field has no use of research computing or data facilities.
For me, non-traditional involves your problem is not suited to an HPC or HTC system.
Before we get to the panelists, all the attendees, though, let's hear you. So, Annalie, good to have you here. The arts.
Thank you, Bob.
History, law school. That's a good one. I hadn't thought about that. I don't think we discussed that in our pre-panel meeting. Dance, libraries. Thanks, Sid. Yeah, anthropology. Maybe even think also seeing the law school as the div school or divinity school might be a non-traditional discipline as well. Languages in English. Yeah, education. Religion and business management. I like that.
Religious business management or business religion management?
Right. And music. Yeah, that's a good one as well. So yeah, if you'd like to keep adding them to two separate departments, yeah, it's still rather interesting. So feel free to continue to contribute there. I'd like to take the opportunity then to introduce our panelists. Let me pull up my notes here. Apologies for this. So I'm going to first have each one introduce themselves, where they're from. Also going to ask where they're from, the organization, how many years each has been in the field, and talk a little bit about the client base, like, for researcher facing or spent in a facilitation role. So we'll start here with Francesca.
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here with you all today. So I'm a digital research supervisor for the Office of Advanced Research Computing at UCLA. I am specifically a lead of the GIS and visualization team of the research technology group for my unit. My specialization is in extended reality or XR technology. I trained as an art historian, a filmmaker, a curator, a cultural studies scholar, and a digital humanist. So I would say when I got into digital humanities or digital art history, that's when I would say I sort of got into this field. And that would be about a decade ago, a little over a decade ago. I also, because of this, was brought into the department that I'm in, really to help advocate for non-traditional disciplines in computing research. So much of my time, more than most folks in my department, goes to working with researchers in the arts and humanities and social sciences in particular.
Great, thank you, Francesca. Next is Kirk Ann.
So I'm Kirk Hann, Director of Research Computing at RIT, and I've been doing this for 5-10 years, depending on how you measure. And I work across many disciplines, the hard sciences, but worked on motion capture for dance performance, multispectral imaging for painting, and palimpsest analysis of languages, of ancient languages, text analysis of Shakespeare and things like that. So yeah, anthropology, done that too. Law is the one that I haven't touched yet.
Great, thanks, Kurt. Kevin.
Yeah, Kevin Brandt. I'm from South Dakota State University in Brookings, South Dakota. Been working here at SDSU for a little over 25 years. Been involved, started my my journey out here at SDSU working for an engineering department, and along with that is working on engineering degrees. And but no, over time I fell into a management position. I've been involved in a lot of different areas within management over the past 18 years. Right now I'm an AVP for cyber infrastructure here at SDSU. We provide services obviously to the university, but we do to the other state institutions. Not all of them within the state, but quite a few of them we do. So, you know, we're a land grant institute. We have a lot of STEM research that happens here on campus. But we also have some work that's being done within the social sciences and humanities. You know, in terms of my time spent in terms of facilitation, you know, it varies, but, you know, I'd say probably right around 30%. And you know, when I think of the different projects we've had within the humanities, not been a lot, but I'd say anywhere from about 3 to 4 to 5%. I also was, I led a project role within a regional cyber team. And with that, we were able to engage some institutions that did have a strong base of, you know, in the area of humanities and social sciences. So, you know, that provided me with a lot of great experience just beyond the STEM fields in terms of facilitation.
Great, thanks, Kevin. Let's see, sorry, Jose.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jose. I work at Florida State University within the Research Computing Center. I am their digital humanities technology specialist. What that means is I help mostly just humanities and arts and social science people utilize FSU's high performance computing resources. Most of my time is spent between education efforts and facilitation efforts. So we've worked with history department, English, a lot of work in the linguistics departments, criminology, and we just integrate our tools into what they have over there. But yeah.
I like that criminology too. Is that something new? I'm curious, like, have you looked at their usage and pretty, you know, in types of usage they have?
Yeah, it depends on the professor and their students and how much they integrate their own tools into what we have. But yeah.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. James.
Sorry. Hi, everybody. Sorry about that. Thank you for your time today. My name is James Kelly. I'm a senior systems administrator for research with a medium small private university in Southern California called Chapman University. We're a fairly new and small research institution. So my position's only existed about 3 years. And until just recently, I was pretty much the only person on the team. So since my university is new to research, I've been basically doing everything. You know, you kind of get called upon to participate in every possible area of this, and whoever walks through the door, you help them. I come from the sort of infrastructure point of view or side. I you know, Linux guy going way back, used to work at another university in Southern California, University of California, Irvine. So when the Chapman created or started investing heavily in trying to grow their research, especially graduate research. I was pulled out of another position. So it's probably about half and half until, as I said, just recently, what changed was we did hire a second person for the team, a very brilliant research software engineer that we were lucky enough to hire away from UCI. But until then, I was doing pretty much half infrastructure, half research facilitation. And at the university, since we're so new, all of the humanities and arts departments, the faculty there, they didn't know they weren't supposed to not know what they were doing, which is complex, but they were asking also, essentially, when the university grew that. So I've worked with several projects. I've been very interesting with the business school and the humanities, various humanities. One big project with the history department. Nobody from dance yet. I saw somebody in the chat talk about dance. Nobody from dance yet.
Great, thank you. And last, Dina.
Hi, my name's Dina Strong. I'm with the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. My primary job role is in the web hosting team at our technology services central IT department. But for about the past 10 years, I've also been working with our library's research data service as a tech services to library to RDS liaison. And during that time, I have consulted with literally people ranging from astrophysics to zoology. I do tend to cluster around LAS, humanities, and smaller departments that don't have their own clearly identified IT unit. Like I don't get references from people in engineering because engineering has its own entire IT department. But lots of the small departments, somebody will come through and go, I don't know how to do this thing, or how can, honestly, what I get the most is I need a database. And then I ask them a few more questions. And what it turns out is they need a content workflow management system with a front end that's already built on top of that database. But starting with, what do you want your data to do? Where do you want it to go? Who all is going to be working with it is, I would say, 80% of my research related consults. And very, very often folks will say things like, I want a completely custom system that is uniquely tuned to my needs and also possibly multilingual. And I say, great, do you have $100,000 in 3 years? And like, nope, okay. So let's see what we've got on campus that will do 80% of what you need out of the box and how we can tweak it to get to closer to 95. That is the story of many, many, many of my consultations across all of those fields.
Great, thank you, Dina. I'm going to actually do a little something unconventional here. And I'm actually going to pause and say, would anybody like to ask any questions from introductions? I'd take a few minutes before we dive into some of the panel questions. I think the backgrounds, everyone's backgrounds are so diverse and interesting. Okay. So, all right. So we'll move on then. So I want to take a moment. We're going to do something also a little unconventional. I'm going to ask the panelists. We're going to sort of start bottom up and say the question here is, I'd like each of the panelists to share a memorable story, and this is positive or not, on something that has had an impact on your work, your career, or how you approach facilitating due to one or more persons in your non-traditional client base. And so thinking about how we go about our work and in facilitation, what memorable story would you like to share with the attendees? And randomizing the order this time. So Jose, you're up first.
Sounds great. So yeah, the story I would like to share, we did a project with the history department. So my background is bachelor's history, master's digital humanities. So I didn't have any high performance background except on the job training I received when I went in. So we did this project with a history professor, Professor Will Hanley at our university, and we made a database for him, just holding a lot of newspaper records that he could sift through and use. But the important thing about this was that we kept the avenue open for future research. And I think that's the most important lesson I found, is that keeping the connection with those researchers, but at the same time, making it clear when projects end and start, makes it so workflows are easier. But then in his case, it became not only the collection, but once that was done, it became a whole research project with a few research presentations down the way, a Python library that was developed by us too. So it became a multifaceted, I would say, project as we went on with the later iterations of it. But the original starting point was just a simple consultation to make a database. And I think that the key is having that relationship, but also keeping it open for future ideas. Yeah.
Yeah, I see a couple of comments that Anita, yes, establishing and building relationship is key. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. So we'll go Dina and then James next as well.
I think one of my most striking memories was from a couple of years ago. There's 3 conferences on 3 continents, and fortunately they were all online, so that I could, as long as I was conscious, I could hop from one to the other. And one of the most striking parallels that I saw was a digital humanities conference right up against an HPC HGC conference. And so the vendors at the HPC HGC conference were, having these glamour shots and expensive commercials and talking about the richness and wealth of all of their resources. And the folks in, the very next panel on digital humanities, like, the person who built this thing retired 13 years ago, and the version of PHP that's dependent on is being retired next fall. And we don't have any money to get anybody to rewrite it. Like, the contrast in the baseline assumptions in different fields is really, really striking to me. And so that's one of the reasons. One of my first questions to folks is literally, what are you already using? Because I go into every consult wanting to come out with a review of what the options are, and I mentally call it beg, borrow, or steal, right? There's the is there anybody you can beg to build this thing for you from scratch? Is there anything already existing in a similar field that you can borrow? Is there any, has Microsoft done anything that we can lean upon? Microsoft, Google, are there any big toolkits out there that we can use to get you the resources that you probably haven't got if you're talking to me? Because if you're talking to me, you don't have campus IT behind you. You don't have a programmer of your own. You have a data, you have a project, you may have lots and lots of things that you've been working on and sort of limping through, possibly for a couple of years, but you've hit some sort of breaking point where the resources that you've got aren't helping you do what you need to do in the timeline that you need to do them in. And so I need to understand their landscape, their resources, their timelines before I even start thinking about what is going to be the solution. So that, let me see, this is probably still in the buffer if my focus is there. That's behind the multilingual, multinational project that I had a consult with these folks literally last week because I'm very proud of the fact that this has survived, I think, 4 generations and counting of complete grad student changeover. They went from 18 different systems, literally, they were tracking things in, including a Google Sheet. They were losing data records by, somebody had their focus in the wrong place and hit spacebar, and then, somebody else was editing somewhere else, and you can't undo at that point. I got them onto SharePoint for tracking of the changes being made to the XML files for the transcripts, and I got them onto a local install of MediaWiki for the translation, because that was the only thing out there that gave people a translation program side by side for free, right? There's a lot, if you have $100,000 in 3 years, there's a lot more you can do. But I've never worked with anybody who was in that area. And so that's why I sort of have the, guerrilla improv approach to scraping together the pieces of what already exists, and putting things together that will let people get started, get close enough to where they're going, and take the agile approach to tweak, refine, using as many available tools as possible. I am sorry if that did not sound coherent. I apologize, migraine land. Did that make any sense?
It was good.
Okay.
I think James, you're up next. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. My most memorable story was as a relatively new research facilitator and research, HPC sysadmin. Of course, we all start with working with the traditional, institutional areas, and I'd gotten used to faculty, some, or postdocs or grad students, but they were embedded in a kind of institutional cultural knowledge base about what's possible. And even if they don't know how to do a certain thing, they're surrounded by people that kind of do. And even though my university was still relatively new, a lot of these people were coming from previous institutions or had, wider experience. So what I found really memorable was the first project that I worked with was a business school faculty member who came to us, the research team, but that's essentially at that point was me and 1/8 of a boss. And he not having that same cultural institutional experience, because the business school at our university, research meant something entirely different. He had an idea. He had heard from a friend of a friend about what machine learning could maybe do. And it occurred to him to connect that with satellite imagery. And he thought maybe it would be possible to train a neural network or some sort of AI technology. He didn't even really have the vocabulary at that point to essentially analyze regional economic levels and other sort of socioeconomic properties purely from satellite imagery. And he really walked in, unlike everybody else, in my experience at that time, he walked in not even knowing what vocabulary to use to describe what he thought might be possible. It was really a kind of whole cloth experience that I hadn't had yet. Most of the traditional people, it's how not to hurt yourself with R, or how do I run MATLAB on the cluster? But this was very much a kind of make it up out of nothing with someone who just has an idea. And the other projects that have been in the non-traditional areas, they've been like that. Somebody walks in, can I use some sort of machine learning or online service to transcribe handwritten historical letter images? Not just do the imaging of it, but actually to do the transcription. And so we tried to help that professor use an Amazon service called Textract, which was less than perfectly successful and used up all their budget. No, so it was really, I found it very, I liked it a lot. It was not so much do this for me now, it was help me figure out if what I'm thinking is even possible. And then after that, it was just a lot of mapping and vocabulary, things that other people in other areas, more traditional areas, they tend to just sort of absorb it kind of osmotically, whether they want to or not. And in some of these areas where computational tools have not been a traditionally used resource, they don't even know what to ask for. But they're all bright people, and they figure it out quick. And it was just a lot of fun working with somebody out of nothing like that.
I would imagine just someone who sort of, if you will, breaks the typical mold of how you work and how they approach requesting assistance is rather refreshing.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we'll go Kevin, and then Francesca, and then Kirk.
Yeah, the opportunity I had it happened several years after I started working in research computing. I had somebody approach me from journalism, mass communications, and I met with that person, and they were looking towards putting a proposal together for an NSF career grant. And so, I found out, rather fast that we really have to change the way we approach, the non-traditional disciplines in that, they're not going to understand a lot of times the jargon. And so what I found that we had to do is kind of back up and then trying to just break it down to the basics of what they're trying to do, what they want to accomplish, and then start putting those pieces together and letting them know what's possible, and then giving some examples of that. And then like I said, in some sense, we may bring in somebody from another discipline too. We do have a strong data science and strong computer science program. So like I said, for us it was a great experience. Essentially what this person was looking at doing is mining Twitter data and then looking at patterns within that data. And it was really very interesting project in itself. And two, again, it allowed us, we needed to vary our model when we came to doing facilitation when we talked with the non-traditional disciplines. Again, like I said, there's some things that they may be a little less familiar with workflows of HPC systems and things like that. And so we spent a little more time describing that. And so our approach changed, depending on what the person had for experience coming in the door. Some of the people within the non-traditional disciplines have done some numerical work in their past. Most of it is qualitative type work, but and so, like I said, for us, it was a really great experience, and it really opened my eyes to how they approach, or how they look at different problems, and how we help them facilitate those solutions for those problems for them. So again, for us, it was a great experience, and it was a great opportunity. Unfortunately, didn't get funded the first go around, but on the second retry he did. So like I said, it was a great experience and a great project to be a part of.
Just a quick thing before we go on, Francesca. I'm very curious, when you brought in the sort of more traditional a person from a more traditional disciplines, was there success right away? Were there conversation or difficulties?
Yeah, essentially, there was obviously a conversation I had with that expert, and then I brought in somebody that can, I don't want to reach the broad masses when it comes to problems. You've got some people that there are some people that are very good at what they do, but maybe not so broad in how they interpret things. And in their approach too. So yes, I try to pick somebody that has great interpersonal skills and obviously wants to help, and so I obviously has expertise in that field too. So
Francesca.
Yeah, so something that's been very memorable for me or stood out for me in terms of my research facilitation experience was actually when sort of the reverse happens, where I've gone out instead of, we're typically, right, we're sought out as experts and there as resources and people come to us. But in some cases, I've sought professors and have said, I think this technology might be really useful to you in your research. And one such example was a professor in world arts and cultures / dance at UCLA who had curated an exhibition at our Fowler Museum. And I brought to his attention this 360 camera capture and WebXR platform that could document the exhibition they had put on, which was going to be traveling to other places. And I think what was really fortuitous in some ways about that was not only were they open and excited to do this before the exhibition closed and traveled to somewhere else, but it was right before the pandemic shutdown. So in fact, it became something very useful because they weren't able to get the kind of attendance at the other locations that they were hoping for. And that exhibition could then be shared and really be a resource for teaching and learning moving forward. And that's what I've seen as a result of this kind of sort of outreach, is that I've been working with a learning management design team at UCLA as well, which is made up of librarians, faculty, graduate students, and other staff, really thinking about scholarship of teaching and learning and how we can bring computation into classrooms in a meaningful way for students. And, you know, methods training and critical thinking go hand in hand in the digital humanities, which is my background. And I think that goes for other disciplines as well, though. And you know, we really want to make sure that we're exposing students to a range of technologies as well as subject matters. And so digital literacy is obviously becoming increasingly important. And even pedagogically, right? Bring digital technology in research into the classroom can help us broaden learning opportunities, whether it's kinesthetic learning or audiovisual learners, right? And it's led to an emphasis in context, greater within research, and particularly for at least my research facilitation collaborations. I'm thinking of a project that we've been developing called Digital Tendons, where it was actually started by a medical history professor, but we're now working with the anatomy lab, documenting specimens there, digitizing them in ways that we can open it up to a broader set of research and students across campus to learn from these sort of digital representations. So that to me has been really fantastic to see, that sometimes reversing the process and going out and actually taking the initiative can create really great partnerships as well.
Thank you. I just want to do one quick follow-up before we move on to Kirk. So you mentioned about bringing the research into the classroom, and I wonder if you would comment about this being a much more common practice or experience in the digital arts and humanities, or not the digital arts and humanities, as opposed to some of the traditional natural or hard sciences.
Yeah, so if I'm understanding you correctly, Bob, it's those kinds of methods, actually learning digital technology methods in terms of production, or working with data, working with visual materials, learning those kinds of skills, isn't necessarily something that you might learn in an arts classroom unless you're specifically seeking it. And I think what we're trying to do is, okay, this is a medical history course, but you're still going to learn how to work with IIIF data and images in a way that's structured data, and learn how to use Mirador as a platform for side-by-side comparisons. And so those become skills that they can list on their resumes, or they're building websites as sort of final projects, right? And that becomes things that students can put on their website, but it's also making use of professors' data in new ways, and that can be really exciting.
Thank you. Excellent. Really appreciate that. Kirk?
And I'd go a little farther in that this is sort of that hook to get people farther into disciplines. I was fortunate enough, I don't know how I got to it, but there's a combined research group between RIT and the U of R, and actually spanning the world, called Archive, which is cultivating history through imaging and visualization education. And it's a very interesting group in that we have color scientists here at RIT that talk about PCA and principal component analysis and eigenvectors and things like that, and scientists in Berlin talking about chemical compositions and using a very large X-ray diffractor at Cornell to scan pages. But on the flip side, we have a medievalist who is using the imaging coming off of these things to expose what's called a palimpsest, where in the early times they would scrape off the text of one book and reuse the vellum and ink over it again. And a lot of texts were lost, but we're actually finding that they can be found now. They've actually been working in St. Catherine's, which is a library in Jordan, which has been continuously operating since the 6th century. So they have wonderful things. The interesting piece of this is they had a conference, and the thing that struck me is the interdisciplinarity of the work. The medievalists cannot get the undertext without the imaging scientists. The imaging scientists can't really apply these things because they don't know the significance, or, this is their work and they do it, but now it's a purpose to a work. And there's a undergraduate project funded by the NSF where 2 sophomore students were building a low-cost camera so that they could send that out to do analysis to see, well, should we bring the expensive stuff, the $100,000 camera with all the rigging and all that? So they were looking at a $5,000 camera that could be sent out, and they were testing it. They tested it on one of the books in the collection here at the libraries, and lo and behold, it was a palimpsest. And they're like, well, wait a minute. And what they were looking at is there was a previous practice where people would take old books, rip them apart, and sell them by the page in collections, and they would be spanned all over the country, because why make $10 on a book when you can make $10 per page? And they're actually now looking at that. Now that they found a palimpsest in this one page, they think that the collection, if we reconstitute the distribution, because we know where some of these books went, that's there. And the interesting part was in the conference, they took the humanists and an imaging scientist walked them through in plain English about the color science and the mathematics, which are exotic math. I mean, crazy math to do what they're doing to make things work. And they took the imaging scientists and the medievalists taught them never say Dark Ages, not good, and talk them through the purpose. And so as I work with non-traditional researchers in areas, I talk about what computing can do is we can give you the how or the what, but we can't give you the why. And so we changed the questions of working with one of our Latin specialists once, 50 years of learning Latin. To acquire all of that information and all of that knowledge takes 50 years to get there by human hands and by human reading. Well, what if we could take all the books like Google did, 5 million volumes, and now be able to present it in a way like the Ngram viewer? What are popular phrases over time? And now you can start looking at things at, they call it distant viewing or distant reading, where you can look at the meta parts of the things. You still need the humanist to sort of say, why is that important? And ask the other questions. So that's what I've seen from and being a classically trained mathematician and computer scientist, I had to learn the different languages and not try to ramp up. Well, you need to know this very exotic math and you have to learn calculus and all these maths, when in reality, for that particular use of that particular math, all you need to do is say X goes here, Y goes here, calculations happen, and out comes an answer, and this is how you interpret it. You can go deeper, and that's where I see the interesting intersection of the interdisciplinarity is when you're putting students in the middle of this, they start learning the different factions and other pieces, which may take them down a different path and start them on a whole new journey that they weren't thinking about before.
Great, that's wonderful. I love to hear these stories. They make me smile every single time. So thank you. I'd like to sort of go off of that a little bit and ask another question. We'll do this in a particular order, and then I'll do open answers to the next round. But I'd like to ask the panelists then also, and thank you, by the way, Annalie and others for commenting in chat. Please do. Really appreciate it. And I think there is a notes doc as well if people would like to. We can put that in here in just a moment if people would like to contribute to that as well. So our next question for the panelists is what are some of the issues that came up or that often come up in facilitating for non-traditional disciplines that are different from what you encounter in facilitating for traditional ones or ones that are more accustomed to using cyber infrastructure? This time we'll go first three is Kevin, then James, then Dina.
Actually, I'm going to pass on this because I've never done a traditional facilitation.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, when I think back and just some of the differences that are, and I guess in my answer to the last question, I kind of covered some of this, but in some cases they're going to be less familiar again with the concepts. That we have within HPC or computing. And then, the workflows themselves, they may understand workflows, but how we design, the workflows in terms of HPC may be just a little bit different. And then the systems themselves and different interfaces and all the other technology that comes along with it. And, so, they often don't know what's even possible, and that was mentioned before. But what you got to try to do is get them pointed in the right direction in terms of what they want for outcomes. So, like again, you sit down and have a talk with them. What are you trying to do? Try to map that out. And first is what do they want in terms of outcomes? And sometimes you have to work backwards a little bit. But and what you do, like I said, everything's got to be kind of thought through a little bit, in a different methodical process, working with the non-traditionals versus the traditional disciplines. It's just a little bit different approach. One thing too is, and we hit that with all the disciplines, they all have their lingo. And so, I'm not sure if that's really that much different between the traditionals and non-traditionals, but we do encounter that. And, once in a while too, is you kind of have to watch out for, in the area of psychology, sociology, in those areas, make sure that you aren't, wading into, PII or PHI, and, be it people's information, obviously their health information too, social security numbers, things like that. And so, we have to be a little bit careful with that. And sometimes too is, what we're feeding in is more, again, it's more qualitative type work. And so, so like I said, the approach has to be somewhat different. So, trying to think back, I'm trying to think back of other examples too, but I think one, like I said, that I mentioned before, is bringing in an expert, or not to say an expert, a subject matter expert from a different field. Obviously, I don't do that. I wouldn't do that in the first meeting. That would be as you get, move forward in terms of your engagement process. But I would bring that person in too. And what happens is you can develop a lot of synergy, bringing in a subject matter expert along with yourself and HPC, and they with theirs. And in a lot of cases, you can create some collaboration that can come from that too. But again, the differences between the traditionals and non-traditionals, and not that we wouldn't do that with the traditionals either, but the process is the approach has got to be quite a bit different. And in some cases, not so much, but the approach, it does have to be different. And like I said, and again, the challenges too can be with the data too, the data structure and how you work with that. And so, and trying to explain that to them, you know, and the data flow. But again, when I work with them, you know, I think the main thing is, you know, if haven't had hardly any, you know, computational experience other than working on their laptop or desktop, is trying to show them what's possible with HPC. And then, you know, taking a little bit of what you know about what the problem they're trying to solve is, you know, and then that may be a second meeting is coming up with, hey, this is what we can do.
Do you find that do you have a set of use cases that you show them or example projects? I mean, how do you go about it?
You know, we will reflect back at, you know, what we did, you know, with, you know, we had a case that was similar to the last one I talked about over in sociology. And so, yes, I do reflect back. This is what we've done with this case with this person. And so, like I said, being probably a smaller institution, but really broad in terms of disciplines, you know, gives you experience in working with a broad set of people. And so, I can actually probably bring in an example from, you know, one of those disciplines that kind of, you know, falls, you know, within the gray area there. And it will apply to what, you know, they want to do with their project.
Thanks, James.
Yeah, I guess the biggest thing that I have noticed that I've felt should really I should really mention as something important about dealing with non-traditional researchers or researchers in non-traditional areas that I've noticed is because that same division of traditional versus non-traditional, I think it shows up with humanities and arts and to a lesser extent, you know, other sorts of areas as, I mean, it's mainly a vocabulary issue. And we've all mentioned that mapping vocabulary from their research onto the computational uses or, you know, what's possible, super important and occupies the vast majority of your time talking to people or getting them up to speed. But it does also show up as a kind of feelings of inadequacy on the part of these researchers. You know, I don't know how to ask this. These are people who are not used to feeling like they don't know what to say or how to say something. I mean, it's just true of researchers pretty much across the whole world. But so I definitely have noticed that I do want to use different communication methodologies, a lot more storytelling, a lot more metaphor. It helps, and I sympathize with this. My own educational background is in philosophy and comp rhetoric and creative writing and English lit. So I'm surrounded by computational chemists whose papers I'll never be able to read. And I get that, and expressing that, right? The identifying with them and maybe even directly addressing those feelings if they are serious enough to hamper the conversation is something that might be useful. Then just one additional note is the other thing I've noticed is weirdly how not different they can be. You know, so if I'm helping someone from the sciences, our sciences college, and they're a biologist, you know, they know biology really, really well, but, you know, they can't Python code to save their life. They're coming to us to provide that. And so it's a similar kind of lack of vocabulary, lack of knowledge of what's the possibility. And so there's not that much difference between someone who's a world-class fish biologist specialist and, you know, a business school person that just had this wacky idea about satellite imagery. So.
Great, thanks, James. I'll allow the other three panelists to respond, but I do want to bring up the issue of vocabulary because I had a very interesting meeting today that I think would be of interest to everybody. So I think we have Jose, and then I'm going to also then we'll do Kirk and then Francesca.
Yeah, so many of the problems you have already talked about seem to be also on the same vein that we face over here. But I would have to add the main issue is the familiarity and the support outside of research. So we all know that research doesn't happen in a bubble. The education efforts and the institutional efforts that go into forming into forming initiatives around the humanities or digital humanities and keeping that technology in the classroom or in smaller research projects have an impact on how good our students and our faculty, for that matter, are at recognizing certain tools. We don't expect them to see high performance computing as an avenue because it's not in their curriculum. It's not in their familiar set of tools, and that I think is the first thing that we try to cover, either by workshops or education or just reaching out. I know that we were talking in the chat that reaching out is a big issue. There's a personal anecdote. When I got to campus, it was the first time we had hired a digital humanities person for our HPC center. So what I did was I emailed every single dean and faculty member that I even thought could use humanities stuff, and I got called into 10 meetings in 2 weeks. It was my first 3 weeks on campus, and I was like, "Wait, it's too many meetings. I need to take it down a notch." But it worked, and some of them turned out to be good collaborations. Some of them didn't pan out, but they have called me for help later on down the road. But I think reaching out in any way you can is definitely a great way to just deal with that main issue of familiarity and knowing where the resource is, who to go to. Yeah.
Great. I do see Dana's hand up, so go ahead, Dana.
Something that somebody said set off a light bulb in my head. Sometimes we're not the only ones with language blinders. I will change the names to protect the innocent. This is a made up but related example. I had 2 or 3 different groups come to me within the space of a couple of weeks, and with the same basic question of I need a database, but also it needs to have a front end and data management and all yada yada yada. Well, one of these groups did have, this is the first time I've ever seen a group have this. They had a $3 million grant in 5 years to build the thing, and they were working on a migration of their 75 years of data from system A to system B. And then group 2, we said, didn't have the grant, didn't have the staff, needed almost exactly the same thing, but they knew of each other's existence. They didn't know of each other's projects, and their own domain blinders sort of kept them from talking to each other. Group A was like, well, we're working with fish, and group B was like, well, we're working with the mosquitoes that would go around the river. But they both needed the same river data. They both needed the same location data. They both needed, tracking animals of some sort and diseases of some sort. But they're like, oh, but fish are so very much different than mosquitoes that we can't possibly. I'm like, okay, step 1, let's see exactly how far you can overlap with each other, because you're both talking about animals, you're both talking about diseases. At that point, you're talking about new values rather than entirely different structures at the top couple of levels, and making this information available to each other makes more collaboration possible. So I guess the moral of that story is keep your ears tuned for the projects that you know about, even if they haven't talked to each other. Maybe they should.
Great point. Great point. Kirk, and then Francesca.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And one of the keys, I think, is the humility. These are very proud people who are experts in their field, and they really don't like not knowing everything. But especially in some of these non-traditional things, the no one person could actually do it, because there's information scientists, which librarians bring in, the mathematics that a mathematician would bring in, the coding that a computer scientist or programmer would come in. And these are things of, I remember talking to a biologist who wanted to count dots. And when I looked at it, she says, these are the ends of chromosomes in a bacteria. I'm looking, that looks like a galaxy. You know, astronomers solved this 40 years ago. And we put them together, and the software has been used for 40 years. So you don't need to vet it or test it. It's already proven. And we were able to repurpose it. And I think back to Dana's point is looking at it from sort of a discipline agnostic, which librarians are used to doing, mathematicians in a modeling world, and a programmer. A fish is a insect is you know, globe, planet, whatever. And talking with somebody from the American Museum of Natural History is like, yeah, we're counting birds and we're using the same exact technique. So from chromosomal data to galactic stars, same problem, same process, same algorithm. And I think those are the things of, can you help them abstract it away from the detail to say, well, you might be able to use this technique or tool. In databases, we talk about objects and rows and attributes, and to Dana's point, where an insect is, you know, how big, how fat, how round, where it is, same as a fish, just one's above water, one's below water, kind of thing. So I think these are pieces to, and the challenge I think is creating the analogies that help them connect the dots, because some of these things are sort of on the exotic side of, you know, an algorithm. It's just a recipe. You know how to make toast, right? You've made breakfast before. Same thing, just at a very fine resolution, and doing it a billion times a second is sort of the key that I try to start with, of, you know, listening to people's problem and seeing how have I ever seen that problem before, to sort of navigate that.
And I would just add to all these really great points about, you know, how, or some issues that come up when facilitating non-traditional disciplines. I think in some cases, there could be different considerations at play, like how a result looks visually, whether it's CGI or rendered light, color, that perhaps is more subjective. I'm thinking of faculty members like Rafiq Anandal, who works in our design media arts. His work uses neural networks and AI to produce these incredible digital art pieces. And you know, he is working with code, but the results that he's looking for are, you know, really going to be different than what someone else using high performance the computing cluster will look like, right? Or he has different concerns in regards to how that's working. And I also, sort of building off of Jose's earlier point, there's often a period I find of deciding about how or at what level computing is needed and whether it's worth it, right? Some of these disciplines have tighter budgets when it comes to these kinds of technologies, arts and humanities. This stuff isn't necessarily built into their annual budgets in the same way as it might be where there are labs, you know, already set in budgets for sciences and computing disciplines. And so I think that cost benefit analysis is something that we tend to take extra time to do, and is a real factor when doing these types of facilitations.
Great, thank you. It was excellent. I just want to sort of do an addendum, sort of coincidental today. We talked a lot in our pre-panel meeting last week about some of the common themes that we have seen, you know, working in non-traditional disciplines. And I actually didn't introduce myself, you know, working at Harvard Business School as a biologist, formerly trained, but now working with business and social science researchers, where the disciplines are very broad. And you know, we've talked about building bridges instead of having, the persons come to us and on our turf in terms so that we build the bridges to where they are, so that we can help them use these tools while they're still using their workflows and their methods. And so it's more of the familiar. But one of the themes that came up is around, I think, James, you had called it metaphor mapping and vocabulary mapping, which I love that phrase, metaphor mapping. And it just so happened today, on this small working group called the RCD Community Builders, and it's a few people from each of the organizations like EDUCAUSE RCD, CASC, USRSC, and one of the things that we've got these little mini work groups, and one is on, we call it CI 101 or CI glossary and concepts. And it came about because one of the persons in our group is that I work with is comes from the library space, and she's new to the CARC and the whole this sort of facilitation aspect. And she's, I'm still learning on this. There's still a lot of terms and concepts that I'm trying to understand. And so she thought, wouldn't it be great if there was some sort of a glossary or like a CI 101 for people new to this area to sort of help them understand. And so we started this working group. And so I want to pass along, if anybody's interested in helping, certainly to a call for solicitation for assistance. But we met with Susan Maringer, who's been working on the Exceed and such projects for 20 something years. And I guess they had started this more than 20 years ago, is a glossary of terms. And so we started talking a little bit about this, and not just a glossary, but then thinking about concepts as well. So but she's it's been great to see her work on this for so long and talk with her a little bit more about it. So yeah, I'll just put it out there. If anybody is interested in helping, certainly I think we'd like the help, but feel free to use this as a way to bridge as well. So we're going to ask one more question. It's open to the panel, and then I'm going to take questions from all the attendees. We still have great attendance. Thank you. And we have 96 people. So the final question I'm going to ask our panelists, let me get to where it is okay. So what would you recommend that people learn, study, et cetera, or team with others, librarians, artists, humanists, mathematicians, in order to work more smoothly with researchers or non-traditional researchers? And so I'll just leave it there for anyone to unmute, any of the panel to unmute and answer.
My two big things, the reason that I think that I'm good at my job has nothing to do with my technical background. It has to do with having been a journalist for multiple years and having taken reference interview techniques, with reference librarian classes while I was getting my MLIS. Because I feel like the core of everything we do is really getting a good mental model and reflecting it back to the person so that you understand and they understand the shared framework. Everything else builds off of that.
Yeah, I think it's setting the ground rules for the team to sort of give permission to say, ask any question, because we're all learning about this, and that portraying it's okay to ask the questions, because there's, well, I don't know what a PCA is, and we use jargon so freely, especially in the computing realm. We have to remember that they have their jargon too, and for us to make that bridge of the language to map those metaphors and tie those things together. For example, the word taxonomy, it's got like 10 different terms in different disciplines, and each have a very specific mapping. The other thing is to know where the sore points are when you're stepping on somebody's toes, or where just don't say that, or be aware that that is a trigger phrase. One that comes to mind is when I was sitting at a digital humanities thing and said, wait a minute, you are only, one or two authors is a big team. And then I told them there's physics papers with 3,000 authors, and they're all, they all looked at me like I had six heads. But these are the things now where that is a common practice in like the Large Hadron Collider in physics, but completely alien to a humanist. So how is that game going to change? And some of these have millennia of history and tradition and the way things work. So these are things that we need to be aware of and keep an open mind, and ask the questions of like, but why is that, in a respectful way, which is sometimes challenging.
On a purely pragmatic note, I would say that one of the things that the non-traditional researchers at my institution frequently need a lot of help with, that is different than the sciences and STEM people, is they don't have the stats ability. They've definitely arranged to have some sort of statistical analysis consultation or collaboration ready, if that's not something you can do. So that's one thing that I've definitely noticed is a statistical consultation and assistance.
And sometimes the on-ramp for stats is a whole bunch of math, when in reality it's take this data, click on these buttons, out comes an answer, interpret. And sometimes the real trigger to the mathematically and computationally, well, you got to understand why the central limit theory is like, no, this does that. And so I think sometimes it's downshifting it and turning it from a manual stick shift to the automatic push button drive. So these are things, setting that gap and saying there are ways to go deeper, but let's not force them down the path too fast.
I think also in terms of, again, what's translatable across disciplines is project management. I find that all the skills that I've learned in terms of project management have helped me across the board. And we've, within the virtual residency, we're getting so much of that. And it's so critical. And whether it's time management, whether it's how to track tasks, all of that has been really, really beneficial in the way that I interact and help facilitate research. In addition, pulling from my digital humanities background, I would say the general rule of thumb of sources, process, presentation, just that breakdown alone has been so helpful when talking with researchers from various different disciplines. If I can get them to share with me along those three sort of silos what their expectations are for their work, I can really help them. We can get past that language barrier sometimes just by using those buckets. So that, I think, becoming familiar with that and utilizing that in your practice is something that can be really, really helpful in doing this work.
Any other responses from our panelists on this?
Well, I think project management, faculty are not used to having the formality of project management. And I think that's one where, for me, when I'm working with non-traditional faculty, I can provide some of that structure that's outside because they're used to committee meetings, service, teaching, research, and the difference of grind. And that's where our disciplines of library sciences and computer sciences, giving some more of that algorithmic methodology. The one thing that I find that digital humanists come from is an intuition. They've done it so much that they've built their neural net to be able to process these things and identify things by intuition, by a lot of work to get there. But sometimes you can mathematically define it. And then the question is, how do you introduce that particular math at a way that helps them, but doesn't necessarily get into the weeds and even the programs. This is how the program flows, but when you get into the deep of it, they don't need to know that. So
Sometimes they have more project management skills than they realize. They just use different vocabulary for it again. Like I'm coming out of a theater tech background. Everything that I know about project management, I learned from stage management. The setting up the schedule, the setting up the timeline, the breakdown of the tasks, et cetera, et cetera. Like agile development is stage management to me, but nobody had made that vocabulary connection.
Great point.
So when you put it in their terms, then they're like, oh yeah, I know how to do that.
yeah, it's what I refer to as the capital T truth. Sometimes you look at things from one truth or another truth, but when you start drilling down, it turns into the same thing. Stage management, project management, all of these things tend to come to a sort of nugget, the piece that's like all true, of course, and through the different verbs or different ways of thinking. And that's where I think sometimes we jump over those parts or stumble over those parts to say, oh, wait a minute, you just do it this way and this is what you call it.
Good move, Kirk, by the way, for wearing your RIT shirt there. So we have about 4 minutes left. Sorry, it's a little bit longer than I had expected, but that's okay. The discussion was too good. I didn't want to stop. So I'll take a break here and say, are there any questions from the attendees that they'd like to bring to the panelists? And feel free to either unmute or feel free to post in the chat. I will go back there. I think there's been a good conversation. I think most questions were answered as well. So Alex, I saw you had a couple things in there, so thank you. Any questions for our panelists? Are there good resources for someone starting on a journey and building a proficiency in project management?
I have a friend who does like a big piece of brown paper, pile of sticky notes, 3 columns, right? There's the people, there's the resources, and there's the timeline. And you just start, you start labeling things and moving those sticky notes. And that is I have been through enough project management classes this time to have some of the acronyms and, some of the fancier tools. And it seems like a lot of folks can get intimidated by that, but very few people get intimidated by either a Jamboard with 3 lines or a big piece of, brown paper and a pile of physical sticky notes, depending on which way you're working with them. But I will let somebody else speak to more formal stuff than that.
Yeah, there's PMI, which is the full-on PMP certification. That may be heavy. But you might want to talk to your business school people in the sort of organization management might have some pointers. Yeah, those are the things I can think of.
Even your PMO office too in IT, oftentimes a lot of folks there grab that. Francesca, I think you were about to unmute as well.
Yeah, I was. Is lynda.com still a thing? I was trying to check on that. I think that's how I got.
I think LinkedIn Learning ate it.
Yeah, LinkedIn Learning is where the Lynda material went. And actually, there's a lot of brilliant things inside of that in both project management and design thinking is another thing to really look at. It's the process of sort of the ideation and reduction of ideas, sort of an entrepreneurial methodology.
Our dean is sort of a champion or leader in that design thinking. So
yeah. I had explored PMI, but it was a little heavier than what I needed. And I found that I did the lynda.com certifications, and it was sort of add as you want, pull from what's useful to you. And so I think exploring those types of things, if now it's on LinkedIn, can be really, really helpful. These things can be picked up as needed, and they make a world of difference.
Hey, Francesca, if it's been a while since you've checked out the PMI coursework, their 7th edition of PMBOK completely changed their approach to project management, and it's much more design approach and a lot less implementation at like every particular level, because it was really granular. Like the last edition, I got my camp last for the 6th, and it's much more holistic in how you approach the idea of a project versus an outline rubric.
Oh, Kyle, thank you so much. That's fantastic to hear. I'm really excited about that. I will recheck it out.
I just actually submitted my purchase order for the 7th PMBOK, so that was like, I'm waiting to
Awesome.
receive it.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Excellent,
Thanks for
excellent. So we're at time. I do see a question too from in the chat from JD Anderson. So I would encourage anyone to contribute to that. But we'll end this on a timely note. So thank you very much to our speakers. Really appreciate it. Again, this is Francesca from UCLA, Kirk from RIT, Kevin from South Dakota State University, Jose from Florida State University, James from Chapman University, and Dina from University of Illinois. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Bob, for facilitating.
Absolutely.
Yes.
It was a pleasure.
Wholeheartedly. And I'm gonna end the recording.